Welcome to the One in the Many. My name is Arshak Ben-Lian. My purpose with the One in the Many podcast is to explore the process of integration as developmentally formative and therapeutically corrective factor in human psychology. The One in the Many is the study of how conscious life differentiates identity, integrates relation, regulates itself under constraint, and sustains direction through time. Subscribe to the One in the Many podcast and connect with me by writing to abenlian@oneinthemany.net. We do not live abstractly. We live concretely. In the movements of our hands, in the sound of our voice, in the textures of our memories, and the structure of our words. Human experience is not raw data waiting passively to be interpreted. It is already meaningful, shaped by how we form it into language, gesture, symbol, and image. To articulate is not merely to describe, but to bring it into form, to give shape to the inner content of consciousness and render it graspable, communicable, and real. In this episode, I examine articulation not only as a communicative act, but as a method of integration. The self takes shape by expressing itself through words, through stories, through acts of creation. It is through articulation that the psyche makes its experience visible to itself. And it is through articulation that integration becomes possible. The term articulation comes from the Latin articulare, to divide into joints, to utter distinctly, to make clear. It implies connection through separation. The parts of a body are articulated at the joints. The parts of a sentence are articulated by grammar. The parts of an experience are made clear through speech or symbol. To articulate an experience is to distinguish it from other experiences, name its structure or direction, relate it to the self as subject, make it available for reflection, communication, and reintegration. Articulation is thus both cognitive and creative. It is an act of consciousness ordering what is given by perception, memory, or emotion, shaping chaos into coherence. When experiences go unarticulated, they remain unformed in the mind. This leads to what psychologists call alexithymia, a difficulty in identifying and describing one's emotions. More broadly, it results in confusion, repetition of dysfunctional patterns, and a loss of agency. We become subjects of our history rather than authors of our story. Unarticulated trauma, for instance, remains trapped in somatic memory, repeating itself in bodily tension, anxiety, relational sabotage. The moment the trauma is named, however, it begins to lose its power. Language externalizes what was internal. It creates distance, clarity, and eventually control. What is unnamed cannot be examined. What is unexamined cannot be integrated. Articulation is the bridge from implicit confusion to explicit clarity. Language is not merely a tool for expressing what we already know. It is a tool for knowing. The act of articulating forces precision. It requires choosing the right word, identifying the actual referent, isolating the essential from the accidental. Language pushes vague experience toward form. In psychotherapy, this is a foundational method to help the client articulate experience, not just how do you feel, but what is the feeling about? Where do you feel it? What does it mean to you? The result is often transformative. By articulating the experience, the client not only gains insight, but begins to restructure the emotional and cognitive patterns associated with it. This is not a mechanical process. It is creative. Not all articulation is linguistic. Art, music, movement, and visual forms are methods of articulation that often precede or go beyond verbal language. For individuals who struggle to describe their inner life in words, these nonverbal articulations are crucial pathways to integration. A painting can express a mood the artist cannot name. A melody can bring coherence to grief. A dance can embody a transformation the dancer cannot yet understand. These are not escapes from meaning, they are meaning in perceptual form. Aesthetics, then, is not decorative, it is therapeutic. It enables the self to make contact with experience in a new medium and thereby reintegrate it with renewed depth. From infancy to adulthood, the development of the self depends on increasing powers of articulation. Infants articulate through cries and coos, primitive signals of inner state. Toddlers learn words and begin narrating experience. I hungry, mommy go. Children use stories and drawings to externalize their world. Adolescents begin abstract articulation, values, identity, fears, aspirations. Adults seek authorship, the power to narrate a coherent life story with depth and direction. Failures at any stage of this progression may leave parts of the self unintegrated. Psychotherapy, education, and art all serve to restore or complete these lost articulations. The adult who cannot express sorrow cannot release it. The adult who cannot describe a dream cannot pursue it. The adult who cannot form a story of their life cannot act with continuity or purpose. The process of articulation is the enactment of the one in the many. When we articulate an experience, we identify the many elements of a complex event, its facts, emotions, beliefs, sensations. Search for the one that unifies them, a concept, a cause, a story, a name. Translate that unity back into form by speech, symbol, or act. This is a recursive process. Each new articulation deepens understanding, reveals contradiction, and opens new layers of integration. To articulate well is not merely to explain, it is to form the self. The mind that articulates its word can live intentionally. It can meet reality with clarity and create meaning in motion. In clinical settings, articulation becomes the primary method of psychological healing. The therapist helps the client name the implicit. What is happening in the body, the emotion, the memory? Frame the experience. What pattern does this reveal? What values are in conflict? Transform the relationship to it. What action is now possible? Every therapeutic breakthrough is a new articulation, a sentence spoken for the first time. I never felt safe as a child can become the hinge on which a new life turns. The client begins to own the experience, not be owned by it. Through articulation, the self discovers its own shape, its own path, and its own voice. The true function of articulation is not to ornate thought, but to ordain selfhood. It is a method by which experience is given form and the self is given clarity. The unformed cannot act. The unspoken cannot heal. The uninventoried cannot grow. Articulation, then, is not an option. It is a necessity. It is how we convert pain into knowledge, memory into meaning, emotion into expression, and chaos into character. It is how the one forms from the many, and how the many are seen in the one. To articulate is to make meaning, and to make meaning is to live. But there is caution, the temptation of the singular, misinterpreting unity as a collapse of scope. As human beings, we long for unity. To live consciously is to seek coherence in the flux of perception, to draw together the fragments of experience into a whole that can be understood and acted upon. Yet in this longing lies a persistent temptation, the reduction of unity to a singular state of perception, grasped as if it were absolute. To embrace the full range of perception demands effort. It requires sustaining differentiated inputs, holding multiple possibilities in mind and integrating them into a proportionate context. The singular, by contrast, offers immediacy, a single principle, a single explanation, a single perspective. It feels like unity, but it is unity by collapse. This shortcut to certainty is seductive precisely because it relieves the mind of the burden of scope. One source of this temptation is the anticipation of effect. By seizing upon a singular perspective, the individual believes they can predict outcomes. If everything is reduced to one cause, one law, or one destiny, the future appears settled and knowable. This replaces the challenge of causal complexity with the comfort of fatalism or dogma. Another source is ignorance of cause. To recognize the true scope of a perceptual range is to acknowledge that multiple factors act together, often in layered or hidden ways. This demands differentiation, patience, and volitional effort. The refusal to differentiate, whether from inability or unwillingness, narrows perception to a single dominant factor, neglecting the richness of cause. At root, the temptation of the singular arises from a deeper dynamic, the avoidance of integration. Integration is not merely the collection of many into one, it is the proportional ordering of the many under the guidance of unity. This demands energy, sustained attention, and volitional focus. To collapse the many into a single absolute, whether a mystical intuition, a rigid dogma, or a reductionist formula, is to evade the responsibility of integration itself. Within the one in the many framework, this temptation represents misintegration. Healthy integration unites the many within the one, preserving the richness of scope while achieving coherence. Misintegration clings to the one at the expense of the many, distorting proportion and excluding differentiation. Disintegration loses unity altogether, leaving fragments adrift without coherence. The singular state, when sought against scope, is not unity, but distortion. It confuses the yearning for coherence with the collapse of complexity into simplicity. The temptation of the singular reveals both the strength and fragility of consciousness. The human being cannot abide chaos and therefore seeks unity. But when this search bypasses the scope of perception, it degenerates into misintegration. True unity is never a collapse into the singular, but the proportionate ordering of range into coherence, the one in the many. This is the one in the many. The principle of life is the process of integration from a single cell to an ideal human being. The story of life unfolds through integration, from a single percept to a library of knowledge. Through virtue, reason, honesty, independence, selfishness, productivity, you set your values, purpose, to achieve self-esteem and happiness. Through time and energy, from induction to integration to reduction, the smallest particle unifies matter, and the highest purpose unifies your life. You, the one in the many, matter. May you integrate your life with value-driven days.